Welcome to The Explainer. I am your host, and today I'm putting on my lore expert hat. Because, man, we are about to dive into something incredibly messy. Mortal Kombat, a franchise globally famous for ripping out spines, punching off heads, and ending literally every match with a spectacular blood-soaked fatality. But if you actually sit down and try to untangle the chronological timeline of canonical story deaths, you get a massive yarn ball of continuity errors, erased timelines, and wild retcons. It's a lot.
In fact, if we look at the official stance of Earthrealm's noble protector, the Thunder God Raiden, he profoundly states, Mortal Kombat is not about death, but life.
Yeah, shut up, Raiden. I mean, come on. The reality is, for a series literally named after a deadly martial arts tournament, the actual canonical rules of mortality are just a tangled, contradictory mess, totally dictated by developer whims and constant universe resets. I mean, who actually dies? Does it ever stick? Well, let's untangle this mess together. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our timeline reset roadmap for today. We're going to expose the life over death lie, dig into ancient history and ritual sacrifice, map out the first timeline's combat fatalities, look at MK9's death by retcon, navigate MKX's comic confusion, and finally break down MK11's souls and temporal erasure. So part 1, the life over death lie. Think about this. Despite the incredibly high-stakes rules of the very first tournament, the only confirmed death, Sub-Zero decapitating Scorpion, actually happened in the backstory, totally off-screen. For a literal death tournament, you gotta admit, that's pretty wildly ironic. All right, moving right along to part 2, ancient history and ritual sacrifice. Because to really understand how death functions in this crazy universe, we have to look past the modern tournaments and go all the way back to the literal dawn of time. So, the universe absolutely started with a death when the Elder Gods defeated and split the essence of the One Being. Then, millennia ago, the Dragon King Onaga was poisoned to death by Shao Kahn. And hey, quick misconception alert for you lore nerds. The MK Wiki incorrectly dates this as 1,000 years ago. It absolutely wasn't. Moving on, we have Edenea's King Jared killed 10,000 years ago, and Earthrealm's Great Kung Lao beaten to death by Goro 450 years ago. This establishes our ancient baseline. Now, what's really interesting here is how Mortal Kombat treats souls as tangible, tradable currency. Let's look at King Jared. His physical status? Dead, killed by one of 3 possible suspects depending on which game's lore you happen to be playing. But his soul status? Trapped inside the living construct Ermac. You see, when your physical body is destroyed in MK, your soul doesn't just rest in peace. Nope, it usually just becomes a literal power-up in someone else's inventory. And honestly, nothing illustrates the sheer frustration of MK lore better than Queen Sindel. Originally, her death was a deeply tragic suicide. It was this desperate act to escape Shao Kahn's tyranny. But look at the MK9 recon. The developers changed it to a ritualistic sacrifice. And then by MK11, actually scratch that. Suddenly it was a murder by the sorcerer Quan Chi. They took an established, emotionally heavy lore point and just completely stripped it away, turning it into a messy, inconsistent murder mystery just to force a new plot forward. Which brings us to part 3, first timeline combat fatalities. This is the classic era spanning the early games where physical combat actually had permanent, visceral consequences, like in Mortal Kombat 3, where Johnny Cage was canonically killed by being impaled by Motaro. But wait, I can already hear some of you hardcore fans out there yelling at me. Wait, didn't half the cast die in Shaolin monks? Because I clearly remember dropping Scorpion into a giant pit of Netherrealm lava. Well, let me firmly debunk that right now. Shaolin monks, as well as the MK11 crypt for that matter, are non-canon anomalies. They absolutely do not count towards the main story guys. Real physical stakes were established in the canonical story mode, not the spin-offs.
And boy, did those physical stakes peak at the end of the first timeline. Just think about the absolute bloodbath from Deadly Alliance and Armageddon. Liu Kang's neck, cleanly broken by Shang Tsung. Li Mei, impaled on a Naginata. Stryker, lasered right in the chest. Shiva, run through with a sword. Sonya Blade, literally torn in 2. And Raiden's skull absolutely caved in by Shao Kahn's Wrath Hammer. The developers basically painted themselves into a massive corner and wiped out nearly the entire cast just to force a complete reboot of the timeline.
So that brings us to part 4, MK9, Death by Retcon. Welcome to the second timeline. Now, cinematic story modes definitely made deaths visually easier to track, but they also handed us these massive, sudden narrative shifts.
This plot-driven erasure perfectly highlights the sheer absurdity of the new timeline. Sindel gets empowered by Shao Kahn and effortlessly slaughters half the roster in like a matter of minutes. She stomps on Cabal's chest, punches Stryker to death, crushes Cyber Sub-Zero, stabs Jax, breaks Smoke's neck, and rips out Jade's heart. It is a rapid-fire massacre that only ends when Nightwolf sacrifices himself. Honestly, it felt way less like an organic story and way more like the writers just furiously wiping a whiteboard clean so they could start over.
All right, let's jump into part 5, MKX Comics and Confusion. You see, this era relies incredibly heavily on tie-in comics to explain missing characters, giving us these brutally specific off-screen deaths. I mean, we're talking about stuff like Havoc just casually shoving his entire hand into Hanzo's gut.
And this brilliantly illustrates the overall narrative confusion of this modern era. On one hand, we have these pre-fight gameplay intros where characters like Aaron Black boast about killing Cobra. It's super fun, but it's totally unreliable and non-canon. But then, on the other hand, we have the actual canon story mode events, like Devora giving Melita a grotesque, bug-filled kiss of death. As a fan trying to follow the lore, you literally have to constantly separate the witty gameplay banter from the actual established story. It's exhausting.
Finally, we arrive at part 6, MK11, Souls and Temporal Erasure. This is where time travel is fully introduced, basically making traditional combat fatalities completely obsolete. So the crucial point is how temporal mechanics work now. Instead of beating someone to death in an arena, you just erase them. Sonya Blade shoots the past version of Kano right in the head, which instantly causes the present, older version of Kano to just blip out of existence entirely. Boof, gone. It is a massive temporal paradox, but it perfectly shows how sci-fi plot erasure has completely replaced traditional martial arts fatalities.
And then there's the incredibly chaotic soul economics of the MK11 Aftermath expansion. Cetrion willingly sacrifices herself just to power up Chronica, Revenant Nightwolf and Shao Kahn are both killed and their souls instantly snapped up by Shang Tsung. Shang Tsung is literally hoarding souls like poker chips to dominate the narrative. The physical body doesn't even matter anymore. Whoever controls the souls controls the timeline itself.
Which leaves us with one massive, lingering question to end on. If timeline recons, soul stealing, and temporal magic can literally erase or undo absolutely any brutal fatality we see, does death in Mortal Kombat actually mean anything at all anymore? Or are these iconic characters just digital action figures being endlessly smashed together, broken and glued back up by the gods of the lore? Think about that the next time the announcer yells fatality. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. I will catch you in the next explainer.